He's a multiple-time world champion, a best-selling author. He was recently honored at the Jon Stewart-Stephen Colbert Rally to Restore Sanity, and he's joining us here. If you pick up his new book, Countdown to Lockdown, which is available through Grand Central Publishing, you'll also find out that he has a tattoo. Mick Foley, it's a pleasure to welcome you back here to the Fight Network here on One on One.
Thank you very much. I should point out that while I don't have any championship belts left, that I will never relinquish my award for reasonableness. I was actually going to bring it here. I thought you guys might make fun of me.
No. Up here, it's Canada. We're amazed with anything American. Let's chat a bit about the current book tour you're on right now. And my first question was kind of just comparing it to your initial promotion for Have a Nice Day back in '99, and kind of you've been very much embraced by the literary world. You've had a number of books come out. I mean, do you find a big difference with media acceptance now here in 2010 compared to that initial coming out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I'd go so far as say embraced as maybe accepted.
Sure.
But I think in 1999, it was the first, book out of the gate that received a wide publication, and it was just like an onslaught of media, and I kind of got spoiled. Like I thought, well, of course I'm supposed to be on, American national talk shows. Like this is the way it's supposed to be. And 2001's Foley's Good was even compounded, largely because I was featured in a interview in the New York Times, and I didn't realize how relevant they were. And as the New York Times rolled sort of the rest of the world in the literary world, it's tougher. It's actually tougher now. It's tougher to get people to bite on Wrestler Writes a Book because it's not the first or even the second time. So I have gotten a lot of positive coverage because of some of the themes in the book, but it's not just out there for the taking just because I have a book out there.
Was that kind of a cognizant part on your part, writing this book, of including certain topics that you knew were going to go outside of just the pro wrestling bubble of that audience that was going to gravitate towards this book regardless?
Actually, it's a yes and no question. I'll give you the no first, is that the subjects covered that are in the book, Down to Lockdown, are in there because I really thought they were important, and there were some issues that I hadn't discussed in other books, largely, the deaths of so many young wrestlers, and I wanted to do something a little more substantive on the steroid issue. But the chapter I did write that was specifically to try to get media attention was called Name Dropping, in which I had like 25 or 15, 16 stories about meeting celebrities in all different walks of life. I thought I had something to appeal to every demographic, and then my editor had to break the news to me that I had a 25,000 word chapter in the middle of a 100,000 word book that actually had a narrative, so we had to lose name dropping. So I did write those specifically to get media attention, and then we didn't publish it.
So is it a more informed media now that you find as opposed to 11, 12 years ago?
Well, in some cases, it might be a more misinformed media, or maybe a media that searches Wikipedia instead of doing real research. And Wikipedia, as you know, can be, can be very misleading because anybody can log on to it. So what's been really nice, especially here in Canada, is I'm getting a lot of cool questions and a lot of things that are not just taken from Wikipedia. Like, people have done their homework and are asking me things I'm interested about. I know we were talking earlier about the fact that you knew I had lunch with Trish Stratus. And that's kind of selective tweeting, I mean, people talk about their rights to privacy. In this case, it was like, Trish, do you mind if I tweet this? No, Mick, do you mind if I tweet it? Because I'm really happy to see Trish, and it makes people feel good to know that wrestlers are connecting, staying in touch even after they part ways with the company.
Now, I mentioned about kind of almost being, freaked out at times about like certain, stuff getting out there, and I wanted to show you a picture here and just get your response here. I mean, when you see something like this.
This is a tattoo.
We'll get that on the screen. I mean, it's one thing to get, people coming up to you in the street, but that's for life right there, Mick.
It is for life. I remember telling Stone Cold back in '98 that I'd seen some guy with a Austin 316 on his bicep or whatever. And then, and of course, this is a much greater testament to somebody's love of wrestling than I feel comfortable with. It was one night I did something in Green Bay where, this is where Brett Favre, I believe, had just retired for the first time. And I came out there as the MC, and I said I had a great I'd asked Al Snow if he would be part of my opening, and Al had no idea what I was doing, but he should have. And I gave this big build-up to how I called in some favors, and he's a Green Bay legend, number 4 in his jersey, number 1 in your heart, Brett Favre. What? What's that? Oh, Brett couldn't make it? Ladies and gentlemen, Al Snow. And Al came out, and there was some guy who had a Al Snow tattoo on his calf, and I pointed out how ridiculous it was, and there was a fan on the other side who was like, Mick, look at this. And they had dueling Mick Foley, Al Snow tattoos, which was just, just scary.
Well, maybe those guys had their own Diane Bentley in their life.
Diane Bentley, just so you know, after making the mistake of mentioning the name of a friend in the first book, who didn't particularly want to be mentioned, and although she wasn't portrayed in a negative light, has decided she'll never speak to me again. I did some checking with Diane Bentley to see if she minded being in the book, and she was flattered and had no idea that I had gotten a tattoo only to impress her. So the lesson to be learned is, if you get a tattoo to impress a girl, let her know that you got the tattoo to impress her.
There you go, and then get the green light to write about it years later.
Yes.
Now, another time that you were up here in Toronto, way back, it was November the 15th of 1999.
By the way, I thought that photo was going to be a lot worse than it was.
No, you've seen worse, I guess, from people. November the 15th of 1999, you did an interview here in Toronto that actually never aired, where you were going to announce your retirement on Raw later that night in Buffalo,
99,
New York.
Okay, yes,
99.
Okay.
And it's 11 years later. I mean, you go back to that time. I mean, mentally, were you finished at that point, or was it simply that you were done for that period of time in your life?
I really thought I was finished, and this will give you a little bit of an indication as to Vince McMahon's character. When I told him I was having trouble getting around, he said, well, Mick, you need to lose some weight, you feel a lot better. And then I told him it was actually, some memory issues. And he said, you've just had your last match. I said, I have? And he said, he didn't want to jeopardize me that way. And that night, I believe, Al Snow and I won the tag team championships from Bob and Crash Holly. He goes, why not go out on top? And as far as I was concerned, that was my last match. And I believe, we were going to announce it because it was, I don't remember the particulars. And it was only because of the neck injury suffered by Stone Cold Steve Austin that we put it off for, I guess at that point, it was 3 months. And then I ended up coming back at WrestleMania, and then 4 years after that, I just started participating in a never-ending sequence of comeback matches. But at the time, yeah, I definitely meant it, and I meant it in 2000, and did stick to it for 4 years.
And that time period, I mean, when a lot of people thought that Mick was winding down at the end of '99, you had those series of matches with Triple H, which really, I mean, Hunter was getting pushed at that time, but it was really, everyone looks at those matches as the ones that solidified him on top. And that's kind of been a theme throughout your career, whether it be, later working with Randy Orton, or just putting together these storylines that at the end of the day, we're going to have a new star here. And you're in an industry right now where the incentive for a performer to do that really isn't there. It's, giving up my spot, where does that put me? It only lowers me. I mean, you've been very unselfish in trying to elevate new talent, looking at that next generation in an industry that oftentimes promotes being selfish.
Yes, well, thank you very much. And I have to admit, I don't think I've been successful in that since I've come to TNA. I don't know, I haven't had that one signature program with a younger guy, unless you consider Abyss a younger guy, which he's not. I mean, Abyss is a seasoned veteran. I don't think I'm good enough anymore. I don't know if I still have the cachet to really help somebody along in that respect, but I still look at that as my long-term goal, to help establish new stars, even if it's not by getting in the ring and competing against them.
Let's chat about the book. It all centers around this one match with Sting from Lockdown of 2009. My first question is why Sting and that specific match?
That was an opportunity that came my way. Again, I didn't know what my role was going to be when I got to TNA. I mean, I did a match in January of /09 as part of a six-man, but I really considered the match with Sting in April to be my real, TNA debut / comeback match. I thought it was really fascinating because Sting was largely responsible for putting me on the mainstream map. I mean, maybe I would have gotten there eventually anyway, but I really felt like it was a series of key matches I had with Sting in '91 that helped establish me. Looking back on it, and I think I mentioned this in my first book, Sting, I wasn't told I was just coming in for a few weeks. And that was the knowledge that Sting had. Here's a guy coming in for a few weeks. There was going to be a succession of guys who were going to wrestle Sting in very short-lived feuds. And here I was proposing all these outrageous moves and matches. And, you know, I remember Sting like, hey, wait a second. Wait. And I don't mean to make him sound bad, because this is the only story he's ever going to sound, you know, bad in, where you expect Sting to go 50-50 with a guy who just got here? Yeah, you know. I was pretty driven, and, you know, maybe that drive made me, you know, borderline delusional. I was looking at some footage you guys had of my days in Global, and that was actually filmed, you know, at the exact same time that I was making my debut in WCW. It didn't even occur to me that trying to work for both, you know, national companies, because we thought at the time that Global was going to be a national company, would be a bad idea. And I remember getting my contract offer from Magnum TA and thinking it was low. And I said, Magnum, you've watched me wrestle, you know, there may not. He had said that it was like a carrot, just kind of like an incentive to get to that next year when I could start making good money. And I said, Magnum, I said, you've seen me wrestle, there may not be a next year for me. And so I held out and ended up, you know, getting in that $3 grand a week range, which was like the promised land at the time. But no doubt, the Sting matches were instrumental, and I thought it would be, I thought I could really come up with a compelling storyline on why we were getting in the ring again. And although time may make this argument look ridiculous, at the time when I was doing the storyline with Sting, I thought we had as good a storyline as WWE did, if not better. Although I think, as it turns out, that brand name WWE and the you know, phenomenon that is WrestleMania is just going to be much more powerful than anything we were or currently are capable of putting out there.
Well, that has been a problem for TNA, of trying to take that television audience and get them to pay-per-view. And reading this book, like, I watched Lockdown initially, and by the time we got to the climax of the book, like, I really wanted to see this match. And do you think that there's elements that can be taken from this very simple story of a guy who's questioning, do I still have it, and get that onto the television and present that? I think at times TNA, it's almost, you overthink things, and it's sometimes the simplest stories are what connect to the broadest audience.
You know, the fault I have, and I've said this a bunch of times, so I'm not concerned with, you know, sounding too negative towards my current employer, is that we try to do too much. That we don't need to do that much, and that I think if we focused more on the wrestling and had less stories going on simultaneously, that the stories we do tell would make more sense. And I know we've got the guys to do the wrestling. We've got guys who would love to go in there and put in the minutes. And I think it's proven that when you put great wrestlers like Beer Money against great wrestlers like the Machine Guns and give them time to actually create that you know, they can leave this incredible footprint out there. But I think when we rush things and try to do too much, and specifically when we try to create 8 stories every month for pay-per-view matches, that we end up doing, you know, a poor job of long-term building.
I have one question I want to ask about a polarizing figure with the initials VR. That'd be Vince Russo, a guy who you have worked with dating way back. From the outside looking in, fans will look at TNA that they've hovered around that 1.0, 1.1 ratings pattern on Spike TV. Pay-per-view business is not at a level, I think, that would be quantified as successful. If this were a sports team, you look at the head coach, and I think that's why Vince Russo gets a lot of the criticism. What is the other side of Vince Russo that people are either not getting because it doesn't seem to be translating to the tangibles, that being numbers?
You know, it's a small field of people who've written television for wrestling successfully. And it's a lot more difficult than it looks from the outside. I said in '99, when Vince wasn't even working for us, in a WWE book, that I really respected his ideas. I thought he was a great idea guy, but that he needed a little bit of guidance. I mean, I made my opinion known. We should have more wrestling, less storylines. On nights when we do that in Impact, I think we have great shows. On nights when we don't, you don't remember a thing about the show. I like Vince as an idea guy. I mean, I specifically had an idea relating to my book, and within 15 seconds, Vince came up with the idea of Brian Kendrick attending my book signing instead of other people that I would have had disrupting my book signing. I think he's a really creative person, and that's an incredibly stressful job. I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want to have to create time and time again, but because Vince is a writer and was never a wrestler unless you count that title run he had in WCW, I think he puts too much focus on the writing and doesn't understand that it should be, this is just a major difference in opinion. I think the focus should be more on wrestling, less on writing, but Vince as a writer is going to be more prone to that. So I don't think it's Russo. I think somebody has to be guiding the ship.
Do you ever feel, and this goes for WWE as well, that they're almost at the mercy now of producing so many hours of television that the art of the fan actually wanting to see something is sometimes lost in this sea of content time after time, where pay-per-view comes and goes and suddenly it's next night, boom, it's another pay-per-view in 3-4 weeks.
That's my complaint. I wish we would just abandon the monthly pay-per-view format. I think we could build much better characters. I think we'd have better television that would be compelling, that wouldn't have to be abandoned, you know, after a few weeks. And I look at the days after lockdown, where I became the guy, you know, trying to get through the metal detector with the championship belt on. You know, the guy at the deli with the Stitcheroonies saying, "I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to make your day." I could have been that guy for 6 months, you know, and instead, you know, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I'm defending the belt in a 4-way, 5-way, and then a month after that, it's a, you know, it's a King of the Mountain, and then I'm wrestling Kurt Angle in a singles. And it's just really hard to build characters, or in this case, to tweak characters when you're trying to hit that home run every single month. I don't like it. I just wish we would kind of be pioneers and abandon it.
One of the chapters you dedicate in the book discusses concussions, a real hot button issue right now. Just with all this information coming out, how have you taken that information, being that you've incurred a lot of this damage to your head? I mean, it's one thing for someone like me to read about it, but you experiencing this stuff firsthand, I mean, how have you taken this information?
You know what, I mean, it hits home. In case you guys don't know, I've got a little blinking problem, and I don't know for sure where it came from, but I think, you know, in years to come, we're going to find out these shots to the head took a bigger toll on us as wrestlers than any of us realized. And I had a doctor who was telling me, you know, move your eyes to the left, and I have a lot more mobility going left than I do right. Like, I actually have to turn my neck to look as far right. You know, my peripheral vision isn't as good, and I think it's because I took a lot of shots to the same part of the head. As more information comes in about concussions, as we learn that it's not just necessarily that lights out, you know, bell ringing hit, but the succession of small jarring blows, maybe even coming from a hard landing in the ring or on the concrete, not necessarily a shot directly to the head. I know this is a run-on sentence here, but it's caused some great concern for me, because I thought, okay, I've only had 6 or 7 honest to goodness concussions, when in truth I've had dozens and dozens of smaller blows to the brain, to where it takes me a while to get back to feeling normal, if there's such a thing as normal, following a match. I was groggy for days after the Ric Flair match, although the only time I was hit in the head was you know, with my own book. But I think possibly just the jolt of landing hard on the concrete just rattles my brain around in a way that I can't have done anymore. So when I talk about having just a couple matches left, you know, I mean, I've got just a couple matches left.
What did that Ric Flair match kind of tell you coming out of that match? Was it the kind of match you put a lot of pressure on yourself to kind of, this is going to define where I fit into the TNA roster and on the card?
No, actually, I mean, I was almost feeling like I had set myself up for disappointment following the in-ring promo. That was so intense. The only drawback to that promo was that we had a month before the next week of TV aired. And where if I had said, boom, Thursday night, Ric Flair, next Thursday, and had 7 days to prepare for it, I think emotionally that would be a lot easier than having a few weeks for it to wear off and then trying to regain that momentum. And I think the fact that it was as good as it was, and I'll go out there and say I thought it was really good, maybe even great, is due in large part to Ric Flair bringing out the best in me, because I think there is a pressure I felt to kind of, do something special when I was in there with Rick. And before we went out there, about 10 minutes before, I just walked over. I said, Rick, I may have other matches, but I don't think I'll have a chance to have a match this important ever again. And, there's been a lot said about my relationship with Rick, but I think there is a deep, definite mutual respect there that makes that type of match and that type of promo possible.
As we wrap up here, another chapter in the book you did dedicate to kind of addressing the whole Chris Benoit situation.
Yeah.
Was that a chapter that it almost was, from your part, a bit of closure and understanding on your own part to write this? So many wrestlers, it's just, there is no way to really explain this, and maybe writing is the best way to kind of draw your own conclusion.
Yeah, well, I think, the written word is so, powerful in finding closure for all kinds of situations. And this Benoit thing, it really ate me up for a long time, to where I was, very self-conscious about even being a wrestler in the wake of all this negativity. And I realized that I would have a chance to address it when a lot of the hype wore off, when, people were willing to listen to more than just the Roid Rage soundbite. And I thought I'd, have a voice to lend to that conversation. I was essentially trying, by calling it an open letter, it's my attempt to reach anybody who's interested in being a wrestler, anybody who currently is or has been. And I even said in my last TNA Wrestling.com blog that I think every wrestler should read it, and it's not me trying to get a plug-in to buy the book. I'm saying photocopy it, borrow it, do it, whatever you do, and I'm not trying to create the impression that it's the definitive answer to anything, but it's part of a conversation that we need to have, and I think I made a valuable contribution to that. If I can just say that the biggest compliment I think I'll ever receive about this book is that right before our show started at Bound for Glory, Alex Shelley came over and he said, I just want to thank you for taking the time to address, situations that younger wrestlers are encountering. We talked for a couple minutes, and I said, Alex, don't you have a match? He goes, yeah, and his music started playing. And he went out there and then tore the house down with Generation Me. And I thought, like, for a guy like that, who's so good, to go out of his way to thank me and to feel like an older guy like me had really made a difference, right before, the biggest match of the year for him was an outstanding compliment.
All proceeds for this book are going to two organizations, Child Fund International as well as RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. Tell us a bit about, just quickly, about how you came into contact with both of those.
And I will say, and I've said this before today in Canada, so it's not completely new. I always said, a few weeks ago I would have corrected you and said, no, the 100% of the advance, not necessarily the proceeds, but now that I've seen the sales figures, it's 100% of the proceeds.
And I didn't read that on Wikipedia. Did some research.
We're not going to outsell the advance. I just, I kind of understood. I felt, and I asked the question in the afterward, whether this book was important enough to write. I think by having at that time in my mind a 50% a total of the advance going to charity, made it feel like it was important. And once I made the mental commitment and then the verbal commitment to donating all of it, I felt like I would be out there on the book trail speaking about something that was larger than just the book. And so I've talked in the past about sponsoring kids and how much it's meant to me. The amount that goes to Child Fund is set to help victims of rape and abuse in Sierra Leone incurred during their civil war and their children. And the amount to RAIN is rape, like you said, Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. It's a group that I've actually started volunteering for about 10 months ago. It's become a very important part of my life. And if nothing else, I will consider this book tour to be a success, just because I've been able to get some really good positive feedback from people who think it's really helpful to have a guy, and an unlikely guy, talking about what's largely seen as a female issue.
And my final question is that as you kind of take a retrospective look at your career, Mick, you were largely brought up on a national scene as a guy that could take a lot of punishment, and when we saw you in WCW, ECW, WWE, a tremendous verbal ability, and that today's environment, it's so much different in that in today's WWE environment, for example, there's no way you're getting thrown off a cell, nor are you and The Rock going out there for 20 minutes.
Right.
Do you wonder that had you been coming up in this era, would it have been a much different career for you, knowing that this...
You know, it may have been, but I think it's the same argument that you know, fans of modern day basketball have. It's, oh, George Mikan would have never existed, you know, with you know, a guy like Nowitzki who can shoot the 25-footer, or you know, this type of baseball player wouldn't be able to compete because, you know, they only threw 3 pitches in the 50s. I think you have to always assume that really good performers or really good athletes would have found a way to excel in any time period. I may not have gotten the lucky breaks that I did. I may not have had, you know, the people standing up for me and going out of their way to vouch for me, like a Jim Ross, or even to the younger guys when I was breaking in, like Terry Taylor and Iceman Parsons and Gentleman Chris Adams. And I may not have ever gotten a guy like Vince McMahon to take a really close look and give the ball to an unlikely, you know, an unlikely ball carrier. But I think I would have found a way to do something.
Well, Mick, I will always classify you as one of the best, and someone that was always concerned about leaving things better than when you got there. The book is called Countdown to Lockdown. It's available now through Grand Central Publishing. And Mick, thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make your day.